Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back to my channel. Am I ready for this? I don't know. I just don't know if I'm ready for this. And I say that because this will be my third attempt to record this particular episode of Critiquing Creationism. Or maybe I should say, Duff reacts, right? I just wanted to react to this particular article. Found myself watching a react video to a Blackpink video today, and I'm thinking, wow, could I just sit there and just nod my head and go like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And just do that for 10 minutes and get 50,000 views. Ridiculous. The video is great. The reaction, not so great. And it's kind of like, if you're a first time viewer of this channel, I could tell you, you fell into a very niche topic. This particular video, sometimes I cover bigger topics on science and creation and faith and so forth, but we're going way down in the weeds, and that's why I've started this video 2 times, because I know that it's only for a few people, a few people who are dedicated to looking at the well, I don't want to, I almost said backwater of creation science, but this is on Answers in Genesis website. So this is a big audience for this article. And yet I still think of it as being a very niche area within a niche area of the science, faith, creationism, evolution debate. And yet I felt compelled to respond to some things that are in this particular article. I wasn't supposed to be there. Yes, we're going to be talking Nathaniel Jensen. Nathaniel Jensen, Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, the Harvard PhD that Ken Ham has hired in his stable of PhDs at Answers in Genesis to lend an air of credibility to their work, has been slaving away, mostly behind the scenes. We've hardly seen anything from Nathaniel Jensen over the last 2 years. He's only written a couple articles for the website and given maybe a couple talks. All right, done a couple interviews. I've watched a couple interviews on YouTube. And then he now has this book, They Had Names. It's really a creationist perspective, although we're not going to get into this book. We're just sticking with this article here. A creationist perspective on the peoplings of America, or the peoplings, the Native American peoplings of North America and of South America, but mostly North America. He's had a long-standing interest in Native American history, and he's applying some of his methods to exploring that. So now here comes Jeanson with this article, which is, there's a flurry of articles now which are promoting his book. But this one is sort of like the meat and potatoes of, his angst about doing all this work, and that he's doing gold standard research for young earth creationism. And once again, he seems to be upset that he's not getting the recognition due. That creation scientists don't get what they deserve when they do really outstanding work like his. Now, you know what my response is going to be to that. One of my responses, because I've talked about that in the past. I'm sorry, if you're new here, you don't know what my response is, but it's my primary response as a outside observer and long-term observer and watcher of young earth creationist material is that Nathaniel Jensen, although he likes to complain that nobody pays attention, we don't pay attention because he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? There's a bunch of things that he's been criticized for that he just can't seem to grasp. And I don't really think it's my duty to dig into all that again and to even evaluate his current work. I think that it's enough to say that he needs to convince that this is where, if Dr. Jeanson, if you're listening, you've heard this before, and it's still true. You need to convince others in your own community of the validity of your work and get people talking about it, get them saying that this is great stuff and pouring resources into it. I know Answers in Genesis does. They're paying your salary, you're doing this work, but to get other creation scientists outside of that bubble to consider your work truly revolutionary and something that is advancing young Earth creationism. Yes, there's going to be people that pick up your book and they're gonna talk on YouTube, right, a YouTube channel, and they're going to praise and sing your praises. But those individuals don't typically have any ability to evaluate your work, right? They don't know the molecular biology. They just certainly don't know the history of Native Americans. They don't know your sources, and this is one of the problems I have is with the sources that he's using for some of his things. And it's taken me some work to really, do my own evaluation of those things. And so most of the people that are going to be, followers of Jeanson don't really have any way of evaluating his work. So it's the people that can evaluate that are really the most important, and especially those that are within the Young Earth Creationist community. And I know that Dr. Jeanson's work has been, criticized quite a bit by other young Earth creationists who have degrees and in research areas that give them the credibility to be able to evaluate Dr. Jeanson's work. And they haven't found it particularly convincing. And so that's why I'd say until he can't complain about the secular community out there rejecting his ideas, or more importantly, completely ignoring his ideas, until he gets young Earth creationism behind him, right? Until he gets some kind of consensus within that community. That's the only way he's ever going to be able to expand outside that community and be able to be heard. Now, here he is standing here. This is actually a caricature or drawing of Nathaniel Jensen standing up in a meeting. And if you look at these faces, if you can tell from this image, these are Native Americans, specifically from the Lakota tribe or Lakota Nation. And he's been given the opportunity to present evidence about their ancestry. And this has to do with the title of this particular piece on the Answers in Genesis website. I wasn't supposed to be there. Right? What does that mean? He wasn't supposed to be there. We'll find out soon enough. So what I want to do is I want to read through a portion of this article. I'm going to try to resist reading the whole thing. I'm going to pick out a couple highlights, and we'll embark on this mission. And hopefully I get a lot farther than I have the last 2 times I've tried to record this video. All right, so let's do it. First off, I want to note Nathaniel Jensen is the author of this post promoting his work. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that you need to know that this is Jenson's psyche being revealed here about how he feels, all right, about how his work has been received, all right, by people like myself. And in many ways, he is talking to me in this particular article. Which is part of the reason why I'm thinking about responding to it. And it's been difficult to respond to, which is why I'm on my 3rd recording. And I hope I make it through this time. And he did publish this on January 1st, 2025. I missed that. I'm a pretty avid follower of Young Earth Creationist websites, and I don't remember seeing this before, but then again, it was January 1st. Not exactly a hot news day, or a time in which my utter devotion is to reading Young Earth Creationist websites on that day. So this is now featured on May 17th, 2025. Now I want to note something about both of those days. This is something that I have been saying on This Week in Creationism and other places. I often remark on this, right? There is a kind of a pattern to the release of information at Answers in Genesis, right? They have 1 or 2 items, sometimes 3, that are new on the front page every day. And so there's like a constant flow of new stuff on the Answers in Genesis website. And the really big stuff, all right, comes out morning time on a weekday or late afternoon, all right, sort of prime time to reach the biggest audience. And then there's sort of like the data dump, the stuff that isn't quite as critical, the stuff that they kind of know beforehand is not going to be like the hottest news. More of their like, well, we'll call it more of their deeper dive stuff, right? A little more complex material. And a lot less of the social agenda stuff, which is sort of their big stuff, the stuff that they know is going to get a lot of traction, a lot of hits, right? So what happens is there's sort of a late Friday dump, sometimes Saturday morning. And this is where I've noted that virtually every single one of the articles that promote Nathaniel Jensen's stuff ends up coming out. All right. This doesn't mean that they're trying to hide it. They just know that it's not going to be the most popular stuff. This isn't going to be a hot seller on the Answers in Genesis website beyond the first 2 weeks of release. All right, so January 1st, so not exactly going to grab a lot of attention that day. And then May 17th, which was what? That was let me check my calendar here. May 17th. Oh, yeah, okay, that was a Saturday, right? So it was on a Saturday. So that was just quick observations there. So now here we have an editor's note. In other words, not Nathaniel Jensen. The editor, got my suspicions as to who this editor is, but I'll keep them to myself for now. Editor's note, the article below illustrates the unexpected social and scientific impact of the research in They Had Names is already having on the wider culture. Right? So again, this is an emphasis by Answers in Genesis that, hey, look, this new thing that's come out, this new book by Nathaniel Jensen, this isn't just like something for young earth creationists. This is having an impact on the wider culture. And this is something that Ken Ham and others so much want to do. They want to say, like, we are affecting the rest of culture, right? Our work is being recognized as providing better answers, better explanations than sort of the secular research is. Right. That's the theme here that's gonna appear in this particular article. Right. Is it unexpected? Is it having a big scientific impact? I don't think so. The wider impact would be that Nathaniel Jensen saying he's getting his foot in the door with some Native Americans and gaining a little bit of an audience there. His book does have recommendations from some members of Native American tribes. And so that to him is like, hey, I'm going out beyond the young earth creationist community and helping them understand something that the secular community isn't doing. Okay. Secular scientists often exclude creation scientists from the scientific process. But when researcher biologist Nathaniel Jensen uncovered groundbreaking genetic discoveries, everything's always groundbreaking, right? It's like a new door opened for him. Actually, this is getting back to the title now. I wasn't supposed to be there. Secular scientists exclude creation scientists from the scientific process. However, research biologist doing groundbreaking research has a new door open for him. You see, creation scientists shouldn't be talking to the secular community, right? They shouldn't be invited to talk to an audience outside of those who are within this exclusive worldview. All right. So therefore, I wasn't supposed to be there, according to secular scientists. Secular scientists say, no, Nathaniel Jensen shouldn't be there. He's not supposed to be there, because he should be excluded. Right? This is the frame of mind, and this is the mindset that many creation scientists, especially at Answers in Genesis, have. Then he goes into a personal story. So this is probably Nathaniel Jensen's article starting right here. And he's recounting this time in which he actually got to sit in a meeting. And we're not going to read all this. He's explaining about how difficult it is to gain an audience with Native Americans. They're skeptical, all right, of non-Native Americans trying to understand their history and tell them something about themselves. And so he explains that one Native American helpfully explained to me the reason for my failures, all right, to connect with the Native American community. Well, I can't initiate contact with them. Right. I can't hey, I want to do this. I am trying to get myself invited. Right. And so he learns from that. And so how did he, as a young earth creation scientist with Answers in Genesis, eventually get in? So how did he find himself getting a foot in the door? by defying protocols of another sort, protocols that mark the dawn of a new era in creation science. Right? It's a dawning of a new age in creation scientists in science. Right? I'm doing something that just can't be denied, and that is allowing me access outside the creation science world and into the rest of the world, prying open that door and showing them that creation science has something for them. I showed up at the Lakota Treaty Council conference because the Lakota invited me. And why would they invite him? They invited him as a guest speaker on the topic of DNA and indigenous histories. In other words, they sought my input as a scientific expert. Right? Here's his proof. Here's Nathaniel Jensen's proof that he is considered an expert outside of creation science. Right? So not just as a creation scientist within the creation science community, but he's been recognized outside as being an expert and invited in. Unfortunately, most anybody can get themselves invited as an expert to some things. Because I don't know, last time I watched Fox News, they had a lot of experts that I was dubious were actually experts, right? So just being invited as an expert, the label itself doesn't mean anything. You have to show up with the goods. According to the evolutionists, this isn't supposed to happen, right? This shouldn't happen. How could they possibly call me an expert? Couldn't they have found somebody who wasn't a creation scientist, right? Creation scientists like me are prohibited from running academic labs. Not true. They're denied government funding for their projects. They don't get government funding, but I wouldn't say they're prohibited from getting government funding. They're forbidden from publishing in mainstream peer-reviewed journals. Not true. I am aware of what comes in the next paragraph, by the way. In short, creation science is excluded from every stage of the scientific process. Now, to clarify, scientists who happen to be creationists are allowed to run academic labs, to receive government funding, and to publish in mainstream peer reviews, but only if they never promote creationist conclusions. I'm sure there is some bias there. There's bias there are biases, in the creation science literature against other creation scientists. Answers in Genesis will not publish certain other people that are creation scientists, right? Because they're promoting views that don't fit what they would like to have seen said, on their pages. I would say they could promote creationist conclusions if those conclusions are drawn from the data that they are presenting in their article. All right. And there are articles, by the way, that are published that do draw creationist conclusions. So it's not like it's never happened. But I don't want to get bogged down in this particular spot in this little article here. Let's move on. Why? Because mainstream scientists are convinced that creationists don't do science. The specific technical manifestation of this view, he loves to say it this way, is the claim that creation science doesn't make testable predictions. For creation science to be considered science, creationists would have to put in print predictions that are future experiments in the lab and in the field. That future experiments in the lab and the field could demonstrate to be true or false. In other words, creation science has to be, in theory, able to be disproven. It's not that evolutionists are waiting with bated breath for creationists to meet that standard. No, they've concluded that creationists have not met this standard and never will. And it's a very cynical approach to what scientists are doing and thinking and how they go about evaluating evidence. And there are many, many, many Christians in science who would certainly not have this attitude, right? Wouldn't say that that it never could or never would. Somebody say, like, show me the evidence. All right, show it to me. Like, you got to put up or shut up. All right, actually show us the data, explain it, and convince us. The problem for the evolutionary community. So what's the problem with the evolutionary community? The problem is Jeanson's been doing everything that he thinks is necessary, or what he thinks that science really expects from creation science or any science. I've been publishing, testing, and fulfilling creation science predictions for over 10 years. You know what? I've read all of Nathaniel Jenson's works, despite what he thinks about whether I've read his works. And sure, he makes predictions, loves to make predictions. Most of those predictions are very simple predictions that you kind of like, well, yeah, of course. It's like, so you found some evidence that supports that prediction. I'm not surprised. All right, it's not exactly shocking. That wasn't a hard prediction to make, in other words. It wasn't a very bold prediction. A lot of these predictions are in sort of like the side issues of things. And they're not like hard and fast, like if I find this other thing can't be true. It's like saying, if I find some evidence that a species, that something's speciated within just a couple generations, well, that's really fast speciation, right? And so creation science predicts this. I predict this, right? Based on whatever this model I have. I created heterozygosity with natural selection. And under these conditions, I predict we're going to get really fast evolution. And so therefore, because I can find one example where that actually happens and I predicted it, well, look at that. All right. I've made successful predictions. They're fulfilled creation predictions. Except that I look at that and I go like, well, that's not surprising. That doesn't mean that that's not something I would not expect in an ancient Earth under the understanding that I have about how, biological systems work. I expect there's going to be some cases where you have very fast speciation, right? That's not necessarily the norm. I mean, on the bell-shaped curve of the how long it takes to generate a new species, yes, you're going to have a few they're down here that are just like exceptional. It's not hard for me to predict that. The prediction that would be difficult to make, that you need to make for creation science, is that all species are formed extremely rapidly, right? And I need to show that like every time I look at speciation events, they're all happening rapidly because I need them all to happen rapidly, right? And that the norm is for them to happen extremely rapidly, even though the evidence from, say, looking at the fossil record and molecular dating and radiometric dating, is that when I average out the length of the time of a species derivation, that it might be hundreds of thousands of years, right? And that's sort of like the typical, time span for the development of a species from two species from one species. And so if my prediction is that never happens and it always happens this way, well then, and you did fulfill that prediction, well then you'd have something there, right? You'd really have something there. But don't tell me that one or two, that I predict that species can happen really fast, because it's like, I could predict that too. Most of Nathaniel Jenson's predictions I could make as well. And other ones I would quibble about whether they've been fulfilled, right? And I also quibble about, whether the prediction, is sound in terms of the science behind it and the modeling behind it. So yeah, he's been publishing, he's been testing, and he's been fulfilling science predictions for over 10 years. But I can't really say that any of those predictions and those fulfillments are really anything very radical. Right? It's not really, I don't really see the problem for the evolutionary community here. And I think they're shaking in their boots over some of his discoveries. Now, his compression of the timeline, for radiometric dating and a few other ideas he has, I would say, he finds superficial evidence that he can force into that conclusion, but those aren't necessarily fulfilled when there's plenty of data that doesn't fit his model. All right. Just because you can pick out a few data points that fit it doesn't mean you're fulfilling that prediction. Not in any convincing way. All right. But, he's saying like, hey, look, I've been doing everything scientists, say you should do. And yet I've been ignored. Right. Shed a tear for me because I've been doing these things and they haven't nobody's paying attention. Because that's really what's happened with the last book. And I'm, with this book, I don't think there'll be a whole lot of tension either. By the way, I'm not getting the book because it doesn't really sound like there's really much, like exploration of the data is not in the book. And it looks like it's going to be a lot of talk. And it's not that I'm not interested, but I'm also very skeptical of the sources and his how he picks, how he selects his information. All right. And so we'll get to that in a few minutes. I said a few minutes ago. I promise we're getting a lot closer though. My early work focused on the origin of species. I made predictions about genetic rates of change, for example, mutation rates, and about genetic function. I also predict the genetic mechanisms by which species would form and how fast new species would appear. Oh, yeah. Well, this is where I'd say, whoop-de-doo. Really? I didn't, this is what I struggled with the last two times I tried to record this, is like, yes, I'm being, I'm definitely being much more sarcastic than I usually am. It's hard to read this and take it seriously. It really is. Because it sounds so profound to somebody who doesn't know, this stuff. It's like, wow, I'm like super impressive. He's got a PhD from Harvard, and here he's doing all this molecular work. It sounds really amazing, all right, on the surface, and especially to someone who can't evaluate it. And that's what makes it so frustrating. Okay, so yes, I predicted how fast new species would appear, right? And then, lo and behold, I saw my predictions fulfilled. Much to my surprise, I remember this article. One of the first fulfillments appeared just a few months after I put them in print. So he had published this book, and all of a sudden, I think that was traced. And or was that replacing Darwin? Just a few months later, none other than the longstanding icon of evolution, Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands, a new finch species is in the process of formation at rates predicted by my work and with mechanisms in line with what I expected. Yeah, I read the paper after he wrote about this and talked about how, like, oh, look at this finch, it's rapidly evolving by these mechanisms. And it's like, nothing about that article, was radical. I mean, it was new in the sense, like, Darwin's finches have been studied a lot. There's a lot of different things going on with a lot of those different finch species. All right. And they did find a really interesting result. But with respect to what's happening in other species in other places, it's not like a shocking result, and it doesn't overturn anything, right? Like I said before, it's just on this continuum of there's lots of different mechanisms, lots of different variables in species formation, and some things take long periods of time and some don't take as much time. You can have a single mutation and create a new species. Or you can have millions of difference between two different individuals and they're not different species, right? So his model might have predicted that, right? But it doesn't establish, so I guess you say, well, it predicted that, all right? So that is evidence for young earth creationism, but it's not actually evidence against anything else. It's just saying, like, yeah, it fits my model, but it also fits your model too. That's not like as exciting as, that might have sounded, to some people, like, I saw my prediction was fulfilled. So therefore creation science is doing some amazing thing. I put testable predictions in print for humans. I've seen multiple predictions fulfilled. Again, I don't really see the significance of those. I really just don't. And I see lots of errors. I see lots of problems with the Y-chromosome research. And there are other YouTube channels that have done in-depth critiques of this. Dr. Rob Carter at Christian Ministries International, another young earth creationist, has written and done a video on some big flaws that he sees in Nathaniel Jensen's work. Right. And you know what Nathaniel Jensen's response to Dr. Carter is? Yeah, he wrote a response. It's in the Answers Research Journal. It's basically, Dr. Carter doesn't understand my work, and he doubts that he even read all of it. The same response he had to me. It's a reflexive response. I've written 10,000, and he does this Trumpian, big number type thing, right? It's like, I've written tens of thousands of words, it's actually more like close to 100,000 words, all right, on this topic. And I've written so much. And so obviously I must have a lot to say, and I must have done all that. Surely you haven't read all that, because if you had read all that, how could you not be convinced? This is just a show, right, for the public. This is a show for the audience. This is a show for Ken Ham. Ken Ham can't evaluate this work, right? He's just happy to have a PhD working for him, doing this work that sounds really important. And then he can put them on display, right? Puts them up there, displays. He trots, Nathaniel Jensen out for his annual, like, look what I've got. This is my employee. Here's what he's gonna, here's what he's done lately. He's doing groundbreaking research. He's up, he's turning over the establishment. He's replacing Darwin. I mean, so this is performative stuff. It's very much like politicians who are just glowing and just telling you this is important, even though they don't necessarily know what they're talking about. So in his research, he's made discoveries about North American history. And this is where he's going to go into basically a pitch for the book and more of his story here. Now, here is where, I don't know, if you're hanging on this long, it means you might have some interest in this. So I will make a stab at saying a few things about his methods here. So he's talking about a particular history of a Native American lineage, and he is using a history called the Walam Olum, or the Red Record. All right, contains a detailed account of the Delaware migration history. It describes the crossing of the Bering Strait. Right, this is all relevant to his his Y chromosome data, in which he's collecting Y chromosome genotypes in order to try to explore ancestry. Right, try to estimate the timing in which certain genomes came over the Bering Strait into North America and were represented in the populations of Native Americans, and specifically looking at the flow of like how Native Americans might have disappeared, and then another wave of Asians, all right, coming over into North America again. So he's using this book that is a recording, a supposed recording of the history of this particular tribe, the Delaware group. And he is then trying to, he's going to say that this book makes certain predictions about migration patterns. And that he's going to try to say that he has found that these migration patterns fit the Y chromosome analysis. Now, here's the thing. I would like to see that Y chromosome analysis. I don't think it's in the book, at least from the description and things that I've been told so far. So that's another reason why I don't want to necessarily buy the book and spend the money on that. If there's not going to be detailed, like blow by blow, how the analysis is done and how it supports his conjectures about this. But I want to go to the whole question of this particular book this is from, I think, 1830s, the Red Record. And so here he's going on talking about, this is what the claims are there. From a handful of details, readers could even estimate the time the Delawares crossed the Bering Strait to be somewhere between the 200s and the 900s. And he's going to go on to say his data supports that. And of course, 200s to 900s is pretty large window. It's not going to be too hard to do an analysis and find a way to squish that into that time frame. That's why it's important to see the actual evaluation. In 1995, the Red Record attracted a different kind of attention. Now, he does admit that there is a potential problem with his source material. All right, because he's really relying on the Red Record. I know that because I've watched his other videos. He has a long series of videos on YouTube talking about Native American migrations, and he constantly comes back to this particular source. Now, in here, at least I'll give him credit. He's at least admitting that there have been questions about the authenticity of this particular text. A graduate student in anthropology published his PhD thesis on the document. He contended the red record was fraudulent. He says that the author had not obtained it from the Delaware. Instead, they had fabricated the historical account. Right. So the guy who wrote this book presumably had these tablets and things that were, had written records on them that he had gotten from. So he's not actually from that particular tribe. And he's writing the history of that tribe and about their migration and their past stories, right, or their origin stories, basically. And surely Nathaniel Jensen doesn't believe his origin stories, since they are not the same as the biblical story of origins. But nonetheless, they could be the real stories that they tell. All right. Even something's not a true story, it can be accurately reported. And so has purported like tablets and stuff written down that he's using as his source, that the author of this book is using as the source to come up with this. And then he's also acknowledging here that the Delaware Nation in Oklahoma formally withdrew its endorsement of the Red Record. My reading of that is that after this and other evidences came forth, because it's not just this one author that has suggested it's fraudulent. It's actually multiple people that have studied. It's a variety of different types of analysis, right? It's linguistic analysis. It's actual talking to and learning the histories from tribe members, and the fact that almost basically haven't been able to find anyone who actually has a historical memory or record anywhere in that tribe of the stories told in that particular book. Now, it could be that some of them are true, right, or partially true, but there doesn't seem like there's very much out. Let's put it this way: if you based on what we know now, there's not a lot of reason to believe that this is a authentic, highly accurate piece of work. The Delaware Nation recognizes that and has now basically disavowed that as being a historical record of their history, of their origins. So now where does Jeanson come back into the story then? Right? So he's using the red record. Well, let's say he is treating it as a possible history. And because he finds some pieces of that to fit his data, I think he's suggesting that that is supportive of the authenticity of the book, even though multiple other sources suggest it isn't. The mainstream scientific community has troubled more than just the Delaware Nation, has resisted the Lakota histories and marginalized the oral history-based accounts of the Lakota's own origins. He's saying Lakota's like, they don't, trust outsiders. And so it should be no surprise then that the Lakota would turn to other experts for help. So now he's going to go on. He's going to talk about how, his data is supportive of some of the things in there and how this is such an exciting finding in the Y-chromosome. But he still needs a lot more data. He just barely has a sliver of foot in the door. He's been able to spoke to him once, but he hasn't really made a whole lot of other traction since. And he's hoping to continue to collect data and be able to use. In the meantime, I'm exploring pre-contact Latin American history, especially the Amazon. Creation science-based DNA testing might reveal revolutionary insights. I like this, creation science-based DNA testing. I'm not sure what makes it creation science-based DNA testing. It's just DNA testing, isn't it? Is there something different about the kit that does creation science-based DNA testing? I don't know. Hey, if you have the right presupposition about how old, these communities are, then your DNA data will be interpreted correctly. But really the testing itself isn't about the timeline or the ancestry. It is just getting the data. It's testing and getting the genomic characteristics. There's no telling what doors might open to creationists next. You know what? My some thinking about all this is actually what he's done could be fine, right? He found some interesting things about Native American history. There is a lot that we don't know, and so he could make contributions in this area. I'm doubtful that it's going to really be a game changer in terms of the timeline, significant changes in the timelines. I mean, he'll make them into changes in those timelines, but um, through his analysis. But I don't think that's going to be the data is so definitive. And again, we need to see that data. It's going to be so definitive as to be able to say like, oh no, clearly no Native American could possibly have been in North America before, say, 4,000 BC. I'm sorry, 4,000 years ago, right? At the end of the Ice Age, right? I'm very doubtful that that will become clear in his data set. And so as he explores the relationships of these various individual groups, he could find relationships that might very well be very valid, might be helpful data. Now, is he depositing this into GenBank? All right, if he's getting new data. Here's what I don't know, and if Dr. Jeanson wants to send me a note, or somebody wants to tell me if they've read his book, does he have that new data, and does he include it that he's collected, right, by Native Americans donating DNA or DNA tests? And has he uploaded that to NCBI? All right, has he uploaded that to a publicly available database? Because that's what scientists do. And so, because that way we could all see it, and we could all engage with that data as well. All right, and test his results. That's what we would do in science. So I think that's a really important element of this, that if he wants to make a real contribution, right, and he wants to be recognized for it, then we need to get to that point of doing those types of things. So that whole red record, the original author, people have searched, can't find any evidence of his sources at all. Like no remains of the tablets, right? None of these, and no other people that could vouch for him. There's just a lot of skepticism among scholars about the authenticity of that record. And I haven't read his book, so I don't know how much he emphasizes throughout the book the use of the red record in order to talk about the histories of Native Americans. But I know in those videos that he very much talks about it like, he kind of admits that there's some skepticism out there, but he sounds like he's convinced it must be true, even though some of those videos were really made before he would have had the actual results that he thinks confirms some of the authenticity of at least some of the stories in that particular book. Okay, where do I go from here? I don't know. I've talked this out. What am I going to do in the future? About and in terms of interactions with Nathaniel Jensen stuff, I don't know. I've had him pretty much on ignore for quite a while, and I think this is about the most I'm going to do. Like I said before, I'm not going to buy the book. I have no plans to buy the book. I don't find this to be important enough. I really feel like this is a sideshow for young Earth creationism. As much as Ken Ham and this particular article and several others that are promoting the book want to make it sound like it's really a big deal, it doesn't really impact the significant questions that most people have with respect to the age of the Earth, evolutionary biology, and so forth. This is ancestry analysis, which is, okay, some people are really interested in ancestry, but in terms of the nuances of dating ancestries and using molecular clocks and so forth in order to estimate times of divergences of different groups, this is just a minor blip on most people's radar in terms of something that's important to understand in order to make decisions about, yes, young Earth creationism has answers for us about the history of the world. And so I think it's intensely interesting to Nathaniel Jensen. He's really, really interested in this. And I think that's great. I think it's like a really cool hobby. And I think he really does want to make real contributions in this area. So I think that's all nice. I'm still just a little, I find myself really surprised that Answers in Genesis would devote the resources, considering how little money they devote to research, that they would devote this much resource to having an individual exploring a sort of a personal interest in this area that is not something that's going to be like splashy, that he can go out on the talking circuit, that others can talk about a lot. It's not like a main big finding, big issue. And yet, but well, some of us have discussed this before, but it's, if your goal is simply to say, like, I have a scientist on our staff that has done groundbreaking research and is doing molecular biology stuff, right, and ancestry, all sounds really cool. Maybe that's worth the money. Just that in itself, right? It's an advertising tool. It's advertising money. And it probably has a return on investment, right? Because donors feel like, yeah, I mean, well, look at this title. I mean, this is, yeah, if you want to be really cynical, right? Which I don't want to be that cynical, but this article illustrates the unexpected social and scientific impact of the research they had names is already having on the wider culture. So you want to tell your audience of donors, especially big name donors, that we're making a difference. We're making a difference in the wider culture, right? Scientists are excluding creation scientists. You all know that. Speaking as Ken Ham to his audience, you know that creation scientists aren't even hardly allowed to do science, right? So it's like we're pulling ourselves up from our bootstraps. We're gathering together the meager sources we have. We have millions and millions of dollars, but we'll barely spend any on research. And we're going to overcome. And what we have is we have a research biologist who has uncovered groundbreaking genetic discoveries. You know how much I hate overblown titles of popular science articles, right? The dire wolf. We've resurrected dire wolves. That's not a creation science story. That's a secular science story. It's a terrible story. Terrible writing, misleading, right? And yet they call that a groundbreaking discovery, groundbreaking research. Yeah, it's gene editing, of a few genes. I don't think they've done anything new there. Kind of cool, kind of interesting. It's not groundbreaking research and discovery, and it isn't what they call it, a dire wolf. And that's the same thing here. This is the same kind of language. They're just using the same tactics and techniques that any secular scientist, or I'll say promotion company, would use, right? To get clicks. In this case, to get money, right? In this way, Answers in Genesis is a well-oiled publication promotion machine. In which they use all of the secular psychological tools, all right, in order to gain an advantage. Yeah, I find a little irony in that, a little bit of irony in that. Okay, let's wrap this thing up. How should I wrap this up? I'll wrap it up by saying, there you are. I told you, this particular video, kind of a niche video. It's only really being made for a couple of you out there. It's like, so if you're still with me, God bless you. All right. Maybe I'll come back and do a Blackpink video react next. Okay. That will be a little more exciting. No, not going to do that. Should I have admitted that I watched a Blackpink reaction video? Maybe not. But since nobody's here to watch this last part of this video, pretty much say what I want right now, right? All right. That's it. I'm out of here. Bye.